My name's Tyler. I'm 35 years old, and I've been a trucker for the past 10 years, crisscrossing the country from coast to coast. It's a lonely job sometimes, but I've always enjoyed the solitude of the open road, especially when driving through the vast, empty stretches of the Southwest. But there's one night on Route 66 in Arizona that I can't forget, no matter how hard I try. It was late, around 11 p.m., and I was somewhere between Kingman and Flagstaff, the desert stretching out in every direction. The sky was pitch black, the kind of darkness that makes you feel like the only person left in the world. I was making good time, but I knew I needed to stop soon for some rest. That's when I saw him. A lone figure standing on the side of the road, his thumb out, hoping for a ride. Now, I've picked up hitchhikers before, and it's usually not a problem. But something about this guy made me hesitate. He looked rough. Unkempt hair, dirty clothes, but there was a desperation in his eyes that tugged at me. I figured he was just down on his luck, so I pulled over. "Where you headed?" I asked as he climbed into the cab. "East," he replied, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Name's Dan." He didn't say much after that, just stared out the window as we drove through the desert. I tried making small talk, but he wasn't interested. His only possession seemed to be a large, weathered duffel bag that he kept at his feet. The more I glanced at him, the more uneasy I felt. There was something off about the way he was so silent, so detached. After a couple of hours, I decided to pull into a small rest area. It was one of those isolated places with nothing more than a couple of picnic tables, a payphone, and a dingy restroom. Dan said he needed to use the bathroom and left his bag in the truck. As soon as he was out of sight, curiosity got the better of me. I leaned over and unzipped the duffel bag, just enough to peek inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, in the dim light of the truck's interior, was a blood-soaked shirt and a large hunting knife. The blade stained a dark, rusty red. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing with questions and fear. Who was this guy? What had he done? And why was he carrying these things around? Panic took over. I zipped the bag back up, jumped into the driver's seat, and floored the gas pedal. The tires screeched as I sped out of the rest area, leaving Dan behind. I didn't look back, didn't slow down, didn't stop until I was miles away. Even then, I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see him chasing after me. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I kept replaying the scene in my head, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't looked in that bag. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found out later. I was sitting in a diner, taking a break, when I saw a news report on the TV behind the counter. The headline caught my eye. "Body found in Arizona desert. Police seek information." I nearly choked on my coffee when they showed a picture of the man, Dan, the same hitchhiker I had picked up. But what really made my stomach drop was the revelation that the blood in the bag wasn't from a victim. It was from Dan himself. According to the report, his full name was Daniel Roberts, and he had been found dead in the desert, stabbed multiple times. The authorities believed he had been attacked somewhere else and had wandered the desert, looking for help, before succumbing to his injuries. The knife I found in his bag wasn't a murder weapon. It was his, likely used in a desperate attempt to defend himself. I felt sick. All this time, I'd been running from a man who wasn't a killer, but a victim. A man who had been bleeding out, trying to reach safety, and I'd left him alone in the middle of nowhere to die. I keep thinking about how he had asked for help in the only way he could, and how I had driven away, terrified and ignorant. That night changed me. I still drive through the desert, but I don't pick up hitchhikers anymore. I can't. Every time I see someone on the side of the road, I think of Dan, and I remember the fear in his eyes. Fear I mistook for something far more sinister. It's a regret I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. My name's Jacob. I'm 42 years old, and I've been a trucker for nearly 2 decades. I've driven through just about every corner of this country, from the bustling highways of New York to the desolate stretches of the Midwest. There's a lot of lonely nights out on the road, but nothing ever shook me up quite like what happened on Interstate 70 in Kansas a few years back. I was on a long haul, driving through the flatlands of Kansas. The sky was a dark, inky black with no sign of any other vehicles for miles. I'd been driving for hours, the monotony of the flat, endless road starting to wear me down. When I saw an old, abandoned truck stop on the side of the highway, I decided to pull in for the night. It was run down, windows shattered, the gas pumps long since rusted over. There were a few old trucks left to decay, half buried in weeds. The place had a creepy vibe, but I was too tired to care. All I wanted was a few hours of shut-eye before hitting the road again. I parked my rig in the lot, locked the doors, and climbed into the sleeper cab. As I started to drift off, I heard a faint knocking on my door. It wasn't loud, more like a gentle tap, tap, tap. I brushed it off as the wind, maybe a loose branch hitting the side of the truck. I was too tired to investigate, so I pulled my blanket over my head and tried to fall asleep. But the knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. My heart started to race, and I sat up, listening intently. This time, it wasn't just the wind. Someone, or something, was outside my truck. I grabbed my flashlight, took a deep breath, and cautiously opened the door. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face. I shined the flashlight around, but there was no one there. Just the same desolate lot, the same decaying trucks. I felt a chill run down my spine. Maybe it was just some animal, I told myself, trying to stay calm. I climbed back into the cab and locked the doors again. That's when I saw it. There were muddy handprints smeared across my window. Not just one or two, but dozens of them, like someone had been frantically trying to get my attention. Panic surged through me. I hadn't seen anyone outside, but clearly someone, or something, had been there, and they'd been close enough to leave those prints. The knocking started again, louder and more frantic this time. Bang, bang, bang. It sounded desperate, like whoever was out there was in a panic, trying to get inside. My mind raced as I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. As I waited for the police to arrive, the knocking continued, relentless and urgent. I could feel my pulse in my throat. My breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I didn't dare move, my eyes fixed on the handprints smeared across the window. What the hell was going on? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the flashing lights of a police cruiser cut through the darkness. The knocking stopped as soon as the officers pulled into the lot. I scrambled out of the cab, nearly tripping over myself as I ran to meet them. The officers did a sweep of the area, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They didn't find anyone, or so I thought. Just as they were about to call it in, one of the officers shouted. Lying near the edge of the lot, hidden in the tall grass, was the body of a man. He was filthy, his clothes ragged, and his hands were bloody, completely torn up, as if he'd been banging on something over and over again. The officer checked his pulse, but it was clear the man was dead. And here's the part that still haunts me. The coroner later determined that the man had been stabbed to death hours before I even arrived at that truck stop. I can't explain how a dead man was knocking on my door, or how those handprints ended up on my window. All I know is that ever since that night, I haven't been able to shake the feeling that there are things out there on the road that can't be explained, things that exist in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reach out and remind us just how little we really know about the world around us. My name is Nathan Reynolds. I'm 42 years old, and I've been a trucker for nearly half my life. It's a job that gives me a sense of freedom, even though the long, lonely nights can get to you sometimes. I'm based out of Dallas, Texas, but I've hauled freight all over the country. On this particular night, I was on a midnight run to deliver goods to a warehouse in Houston. It was a routine job, one I'd done countless times before, but that night, things went horribly wrong. I'd been on the road for hours, the hum of the engine and the dark stretch of highway my only companions. The delivery was supposed to be straightforward: pick up the load, drive through the night, drop it off at the warehouse, and head back home. My GPS was guiding me along, the voice monotone and steady, as I approached the outskirts of Houston. I'd made deliveries to this part of town before, but something felt different this time. The area seemed more run down than I remembered. The houses older, some of them barely standing. The GPS directed me to turn down a narrow, desolate road. I hesitated, but I'd never had a problem with the GPS before, so I followed the instructions. The road was lined with decrepit houses, their windows broken, doors hanging off their hinges. I didn't see a single light on in any of them, no signs of life anywhere. A chill ran down my spine, but I told myself it was just another late-night run in a bad part of town. As I got closer to the delivery point, I started feeling uneasy. The warehouse was supposed to be at the end of the road, but all I saw was an abandoned lot, overgrown with weeds and littered with debris. I double-checked the address, thinking maybe I'd made a mistake, but it matched the one on my delivery slip. I pulled over and tried to call my dispatcher, but the call wouldn't go through. No signal. I was starting to get a bad feeling about this. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A group of men appeared from the shadows, stepping out from behind the crumbling buildings. There were 5 or 6 of them, and they didn't look friendly. They were armed, holding guns, and what looked like crowbars. My heart started racing. This was no ordinary neighborhood. These guys were up to no good. I knew I had to get out of there, fast. My hands were shaking as I threw the truck into gear and floored the gas. The engine roared to life, the tires screeching as I sped down the road. But as I did, the men opened fire. The sound of bullets hitting the metal of my truck was deafening, like hail in a thunderstorm. I ducked down, trying to make myself as small as possible behind the wheel, my eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. They were chasing me, their figures barely visible in the darkness, but I could see the flashes of gunfire. My truck swerved as I took a sharp turn, trying to lose them in the maze of streets. The GPS was useless now, so I was driving blind, just trying to get as far away from them as possible. My knuckles were white as I gripped the steering wheel, every muscle in my body tense. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I managed to shake them. The sounds of gunfire faded, and I was alone again, the truck rattling beneath me, the dashboard lights flickering. I kept driving, not daring to slow down, until I saw the familiar glow of the city lights. My hands were still shaking when I pulled into a well-lit gas station and called the police. When they arrived, they took one look at my truck and shook their heads. The side of it was riddled with bullet holes, the back tires nearly blown out. The officer I spoke to told me that several truckers had been lured to that same location in recent weeks, all ending in fatal robberies. I was one of the lucky ones, he said, the only one who'd managed to get away. I barely slept that night, the events replaying in my mind over and over. I kept thinking about how close I'd come to being another statistic. Another trucker found dead in an abandoned lot. It's been years since that night, but I've never forgotten it. Every time I take a late-night run, I think about those men and the dark, desolate road. I still drive, but I'm more careful now, more wary of where the road takes me. That night in Houston changed me. It reminded me that out there, on the open road, anything can happen. And sometimes, you might not make it back.